There is a rich spiritual legacy of the Society of Jesus, also called the Jesuits, this religious order of men founded in the 16th century by Saint Ignatius of Loyola. And one of the other original members of these companions of Jesus, of the Jesuits, was named Saint Francis Xavier. So this representation will talk about the life of Saint Francis Xavier, who was a very special saint to me, since the confirmation name I chose was Saint Francis Xavier, which happened to be a name in the Wallenfang family. There have been a couple of Francis Xavier Wallenfangs, but also because I was so drawn to this saint, this great missionary of the Catholic faith, and so I feel a great companionship with this saint to the present day. It's a joy to talk about his life somewhat here. So St. Francis Xavier, like his friend St. Ignatius, was from the country of Spain, and he was born in a fairly well-off family, and got to study and teach philosophy and theology at the University of Paris. Eventually ordained a priest and became one of the original members of the Society of Jesus in 1539. He spent some time in Portugal, and because one of the Jesuits who was scheduled to be sent as a missionary to India fell sick, uh, St. Francis Xavier took his place and then would sail, be at sea for 13 months, and would sail to India, where he would serve as a missionary for 7 years in present-day India, and then for 3 years a missionary in present-day Japan. And it was en route to mainland China, where Saint Francis Xavier fell ill and died, and his body was sent back. Though I believe today his body is in India. But in any case, here's a map of his missionary route from Lisbon, Portugal to India, where he was doing missionary work there for several years, and then Southeast Asia, and then up into Japan. So great missionary trek, much greater distance than that even St. Paul was covering there across the Mediterranean Sea. But this shows the kind of missionary activity going on in the Catholic Church in the 16th century. For example, I think of another Jesuit, Matteo Ricci, who was a great missionary to China. St. Francis Xavier developed what's known today as the Jesuit apostolic system. Here are some key points to this. The missionary must get to know the people to whom he comes as a stranger. First point, to first listen to the other and then find a hearing for perhaps what you have brought to share. To seek first to understand, and second, be understood. This idea of earning a right to be heard. Second, the missionary must seek to win their friendship. This is foundational for any genuine Christian missionary activity, that it is based on the authenticity of friendship. And third, the missionary must adapt the news he or she brings to their idiom, their cultural modes of expression, and the whole field of tradition. This is the process called inculturation, which also is very authentically Catholic in understanding how this universal gospel message, the gospel of Jesus, takes on flesh in a variety of particular cultures throughout the world. Like St. Paul, St. Ignatius, St. Francis Xavier sought to become all things to all people. He took the gospel first to the children, the poor, people who were downtrodden, and even prisoners, because with them he found a greater receptivity to consider the truth, the goodness, the beauty of the gospel message. He was also known to be a schmoozer, a charmer, and could have table fellowship with a variety of people, just like we see Jesus doing in the Gospels. Saint Francis Xavier was quite adaptable and really uh, became all things to all people so as to win at least some to Christ. He's also a very generous soul, but a lonely one at the same time, having to leave some of his best friends back in Europe, like St. Ignatius, being this missionary out at sea and in different territories uh, for 10 years until the point of his death. So he would write letters throughout his voyage back to his friends in Europe, but there is a kind of solitude that accompanies the disciple, especially the missionary disciple of Christ. Here's an excerpt from a letter he wrote to a fellow priest, Father Gaspar Bertz, and his overall message in this letter is to tend first to one's own personal spiritual needs in order then to help others. So how can you help others if you don't first spend some time dealing with examining your own conscience and having your own house clean and put together, so to speak, in order to help other people on their path of conversion? An interesting fact about Saint Francis's uh, Saint Francis Xavier's body, uh, his corpse, is it has exhibits some degree of incorruptibility. This happens with some of the saints. You can study these bodies that seem to resist decomposition. So this exposition of his exhumed remains shows that this is hundreds of years ago. This man died, and all of this flesh should not be there. And why it even looks some degree corrupt is because of the chemicals that they embalmed his body with upon his death. So this is interesting. That can be researched further, the incorruptibility of some saints' bodies. But altogether, Saint Francis Xavier was a playful wonder. Here we see a beautiful artifact of inculturation, as we see this through our Japanese kind of artwork, even iconography of some sort, in seeing Saint Francis Xavier there in the middle, the missionary who was a playful wonder, um, for the greater glory of God.